It's that time of year to start planning your vegetable garden for the new growing season. You can grow a lot of food in a small amount of space while providing fresh, delicious vegetables for you and your family. Did you know that in a 3x6 bed, you can plant 6 tomato plants, a row of onions, and a row of basil? And that could potentially produce 60 to 90 pounds of tomatoes, 7 to 10 pounds of onions, and all of the basil that you'll need to make pesto all summer long. Today, I'm going to cover how to grow more food on small acreage or limited space. You don't need acres to be more self-reliant. There are some key principles that you need to follow to get the highest yields with each of your crops. And even if you follow a few of these steps, you'll see huge improvements on your yields. Towards the end of this video, I'll be going over certain plants that I plant together to get higher yields. Sunlight is one of the first things that we want to take a look at. Outside of soil, it's one of the most important things for your garden. Vegetable gardens need at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight that's direct every day, and 8 hours or more is even better. Sunlight is vital for the growth and development of your plants. It's necessary for the plants to uptake nutrients, to help them with the water balance, and create an overall healthy plant. But what if you didn't have enough sunshine because of nearby buildings or trees? If you had at least 4 hours of sunlight a day in an area, then you can grow the leafy greens, like collard greens, Swiss chard, kale. Also, lettuce, arugula, and spinaches do well without too much sun. You can grow herbs of cilantro, parsley, and even mint. These all do excellent in the shade. There's certain types of broccoli that will grow with less sunshine. Regular heading broccoli will require more sun, but a sprouting broccoli, it'll definitely grow with less sunshine. But for vegetable plants that produce fruit, like tomatoes, squash, and peppers, these require that 6 to 8 hours of sunshine to keep up their production. We live in the desert where our summers can reach 115 degrees, and that's a lot of heat and a lot of sun, so having some afternoon shade is really beneficial. We also use a lot of floating row covers to keep them a little bit cooler to keep that production up. Plants stress with too much heat for extended periods of time, and unfortunately for fruiting plants, they can drop their blossoms, or the pollen can get sticky, and that causes them not to pollinate properly, if at all. And that's where the floating row cover or shade cloth comes in really handy. Most of it allows at least 85% of light to come through, but yet it cools and shades that surrounding area that it covers. When it comes to growing vegetables, the most important part to a productive garden is the soil health, no matter the size of your garden. The ecosystem underground needs to be healthy to have good production. The soil is the fuel to keep our plants thriving, productive, and to become more disease and pest resistant. There is a saying, care for the soil, not the plants, and it is absolutely true. It might be boring, but the soil is where it begins. We have to care for the soil to keep it productive. There's lots of places that have really good soil, but if we keep planting and taking away from that soil, it can be depleted over time. Compost is one of the best ways that you can improve your soil. Compost contains many microorganisms that helps speed up that living soil process. And if you could only do one thing to your soil, compost would be it. I love compost. Compost not only increases the microbial life in the soil as well as feeding the microbes in the soil, but it helps retain moisture and nutrient levels. You can add compost any time of the year, but I do recommend adding it to your garden soil at least twice a year. I add compost every time I plant something new. I'll either sprinkle it right over the top or lightly fork it in. Fertility is also important for a healthy, productive garden. When you first start to build your soil, you may need the addition of organic fertilizers. This will feed those microbes, increasing them by numbers, and in return, giving your plants more nutrients. But over time, with just the addition of compost, your garden will become self-sustaining. The way you grow for your space can make all the difference. A good example of this is, say, a seed packet or a transplant tag might suggest that you plant your plant 1 foot apart with 3-foot row spacing. Now, if you were to plant in blocks and plant 1 foot apart in all directions and staggered, you can fit at least 3 times as many plants in a small amount of space. My main garden is all raised beds, and my row spacing is 18 inches apart. By doing this, rather than the 3 foot apart, I'm able to fit in 2 more long raised beds in my main garden, which I can produce a lot more food this way. I can still walk down the rows carrying a bucket of compost comfortably. But the downside to this is I can't get a wheelbarrow down it. But that 18 inches apart for small gardens or a few raised beds is very efficient. You can interplant crops to get at least 2 times as much food in one space. Intercropping is when you plant at least 2 different varieties within close proximity or in the same area. Interplanting also revolves around the idea of companion planting, where certain plants are planted together to help enhance flavor as well as deter pests. Planting aromatic plants like basil all around your garden can help deter pests naturally. This can help you save money and get more production. You're going to get more production because those pests aren't devouring those vegetable crops. Growing corn alongside beans and squash can create a natural support system. This is known as the Three Sisters technique. The corn benefits from the nitrogen-fixing beans, and the corn is a natural trellis for the beans to crawl up. The squash protects that soil, helps keep the moisture in, as well as those spiny leaves will protect it from pests. This is a good example of companion planting and interplanting, and you're getting 3 crops in one space. Growing onions on the edges of all of your garden beds is a great way to utilize space that we generally don't grow on. Weeds can grow there, so why not grow a crop that we can eat? This is an area that's usually a little bit drier, and onions can tolerate that. And they also make a natural pest barrier. Interplanting can help improve soil health by diversifying plant root systems and reducing soil erosion. Different crops have unique nutrient needs, and by planting a variety of species together, you can prevent nutrient depletion and promote soil fertility naturally. This also helps reduce soil-borne diseases. Now, when we have less pests and diseases, well, we get more food from our small space. Succession planting is when you plant multiple rounds of the same crop throughout the season. This way, you can harvest smaller crops throughout the season rather than one great big harvest all at once. A good example is you can plant a row of lettuce or even a row of radishes every 2 weeks throughout the springtime. This will extend your harvesting so that you're not harvesting a whole bunch of radishes all at once, but you'll have that continued harvest throughout that season. Succession planting also includes being able to plant a different crop in that same space once that crop's life cycle has completed. Once a crop comes out, another crop goes in, never leaving your soil bare. This is better for the soil health as well. We love green beans, and we really enjoy eating them all summer long, as well as having enough to preserve for the winter. I'll start to sow seeds of bush beans in mid-April. Bush beans are determinate, and that means that they'll produce a certain amount and then the plant will start to decline. I can usually get 3 to 4 good harvests of beans before I have to pull the plant out. By doing this type of succession planting, I can get a continued harvest all the way up until our first frost. You can make the most out of your space by planting crops that are fast maturing next to crops that are slow maturing, like carrots and radishes. If you were to plant them in alternating rows closely together, radishes are going to mature in about a month, and then when they're gone, they're going to make room for those carrots that need that space. When spring crops are finished, replant with warm season crops. Once that lettuce starts to go bitter, it's only going to get worse tasting. It doesn't make sense to leave it there when you can pull it out and put something in that you're actually going to eat. Cucumbers grow beautifully vertically. If you were to put a trellis on the north side of your raised bed, then you can plant shorter crops in front where they're going to get more sun. Crops like beets, carrots, or even beans. These all aren't going to shade the taller crop in the back, and this is going to make more out of your space. Spring crops like peas can be done the same way. Trellis in the back, lettuce, spinach, and green onions in the front. We have a long growing season in southern Utah, and summer squash is quite productive, but over time it starts to peter out. If I were to succession plant, say, a month later of some summer squash, then I can continue to have heavy production all the way up until our first frost. As each season starts to roll around, plants of that season will start to decline, and it doesn't make sense to leave those plants in there and have them not be productive. It's better to pull those plants out and put something in its place that has the right timing for that season. In milder winters, you can do succession plantings under low tunnels, high tunnels, cold frames, and even greenhouses. You can do things like lettuces, spinach, and arugula to provide your family with fresh greens all winter long. Intensive planting is probably one of my favorites and one that I practice the most here. We have very hot summers here, and by intensive planting so close that the plant's leaves touch each other, this will protect that soil, keeping it from sun scalding. It also helps hold in the moisture, creating a natural mulch. By intensive planting, I can plant a lot of food in a small space. How close you squeeze your plants together will all depend on where you live. The drier you are, the closer you can plant together without having any problems. Here, we water from the ground level, so we're not creating the humidity from the top down. And things dry out really quick here. If you lived in a humid area, definitely space your plants a little bit further apart so that you don't get any fungal problems. You want that airflow. A good example of planting close together is if a broccoli tag says to plant my broccoli plants 18 inches apart, then I'll squeeze them in as close as 10 inches apart. And if it's sprouting broccoli, then I'll plant it 8 inches apart. This really increases my yields. I'll also plant fast maturing radishes around the base of my broccoli plants. These have to be planted at the same time. The transplant goes in and the seeds goes in as well. If I were to plant those radishes a month later, then the canopy from the broccoli is going to shade those radishes, not allowing them to actually create a big root. Get creative and experiment. In a 3x3 raised beds, you could put a trellis along the back, grow a cucumber up it, a tomato plant, and even some bush beans. Keep those bottom leaves trimmed up so that it doesn't shade the soil in the front. Then you could plant maybe a row of beets, carrots, maybe some type of an herb. And then even in those front corners, you could grow some butternut squash and let them trail over the edge, not taking up any space in that bed. And this works. Use other areas in your yard to plant vegetables. Flower beds are great to be planting peppers, eggplants, and kale, and they're beautiful in them. Use fences to grow up vertically. Crops like winter squash, cucumbers, and bush beans are great in those areas that otherwise wouldn't even be used. Adding some pollinator-friendly flowers will increase production. Vegetable plants, even if they're self-pollinating, can benefit from our pollinator friends, and you don't even have to take up extra room in your garden. Just plant flowers right amongst your vegetable crops, and many herbs are excellent for pollinators as well. Some crops that work well together are tomatoes and basil. Basil enhances the flavor of tomatoes and can also deter harmful insects. Onions and carrots. Onions protect carrots from the carrot fly, and carrots protect onions from certain pests. Plant the two together and you have mutual protection. Plant dill and cabbage together. The dill attracts beneficial insects that prey on cabbage moths and cabbage worms. Planting garlic and lettuce together is a great companion plant. The garlic will help repel aphids, which is a common pest for lettuce. Marigolds are excellent for repelling root knot nematodes when you turn them back into the soil at the end of the season. Plant nasturtiums with cucumbers to repel the cucumber beetle. When you plant nasturtiums with tomatoes, that can repel the beet leaf hopper, which causes the curly leaf virus with tomatoes. Nasturtiums will grow great in full sun in most areas, but if you live in a hot environment like we do, I have to plant my nasturtiums on the north side of my tomatoes to get them to survive through the summertime. They need that shade to continue to live, and I want them to live if I want them to help repel these insects. And I wouldn't have known this without experimenting over the years. Each microclimate and growing zone is so different, and little tweaks can make all the difference. But we have to be open to failures and learn what works best for our own microclimate. Don't forget to mulch. You may not think that mulching will increase your production, but it absolutely will. Mulch not only conserves water, but it helps to stabilize the soil temperatures and moisture levels, and plants love that. Even if you use only a few of these steps, you'll see an increase in your vegetable yields. Wishing you the most productive gardening year yet, and may God bless you.